What is our standard of morality, church? We could say it's God, or we could say it's His law. The Reformers and the Puritans, they talk about the threefold division of the law. So for 500 years, this has been clear. You can find it before this. But they began to divide the law of God into three categories. I do find this helpful. I won't build these out a lot because two of these categories we've done a lot of teaching on in this church in the last few years. The first is the moral law, which shows God's righteousness and our unrighteousness, and it's what leads us to Christ. We've taught a lot on that. The second is the ceremonial law, those laws that Christ fulfilled. He became the sacrificial lamb, fulfilling the sacrificial system. He became and is the high priest. Therefore, we don't need the ceremonial laws of the Old Testament because Christ fulfilled those. We've taught a lot as a church on those. But then there's a third called judicial law. And I want to read the London Baptist Confession for a second. And just one little phrase here. Again, this is early Reformed Baptists in England and early America who founded this document. I think it's very helpful what they say here. They say, "To them also he gave sundry judicial laws, which expired together with the state of that people," that's Israel, "not obligating any now by virtue of that institution." So they're saying, we don't go to the Old Testament and obey the judicial laws like Israel did under the Old Covenant. Okay, we clear about that? You got to get, that's what they were saying. But, now listen, they don't stop there. Listen to what they say. They say, "Their general equity only being of moral use." So we can go to the judicial laws of the Old Testament and find the moral principle of that law and apply it to modern culture. So again, let me clarify, we're not saying that you read about certain types of fibers on clothes and we go, okay, we got to shop a different way now. We're not talking about that. Let me give you a New Testament example here. 1 Corinthians 9, 8-10. Paul quotes a judicial law when he says, "Do not," and he's quoting Deuteronomy 25:4. He says, "You shall not muzzle an ox when it's treading out the grain." So Paul quotes that to the church in Corinth, and then he says this, "Is it for oxen that God is concerned? Does he not also certainly speak for our sake? It was for our sake." What? The law about oxen in the Old Covenant was for our sake? The judicial law for Israel under the Old Covenant is for our sake, Paul, in the church. That's what he said. I think in a moral, principalized way. 1 Corinthians 5, here's another one. There's a situation where they're caught in adultery under the Old Covenant. We know the penalty would be to stone them. That would be the judicial law. But what does Paul say? He says, put them out of the church. That's a moral application of that Old Testament principle. So the London Baptist Confession is saying the Old Testament judicial law still applies morally to modern culture. Here's another example. Deuteronomy 22:8 says, put a fence around your roof. You've all read that in Deuteronomy. That doesn't mean that we need to go down and picket our, go down to the courthouse and say, hey, can you all change the laws? We all need to put, fences around our roofs. That's not how we obey that. How do we obey that? We principalize it. We find the moral principle within that. So this is why Caleb and I, yesterday, were in my house putting railing on our stairs, because our house was built in 1979, and the building codes, the rails are this wide, and a kid can fall through it. And so we're changing the rails, so it's a good law. We were actually obeying Deuteronomy 22:8 by putting that rail up yesterday. It's a principalized way to apply it. So there's 613 laws in the Old Testament, and you think, well, man, that's overwhelming. So we're supposed to actually try to figure out how these apply? And that seems overwhelming. I would remind us of this. How many laws are there in the United States of America? Well, there's 20,000 just on gun ownership alone. In 2010, they estimated 40,000 new laws were added at various levels of the country. The United States Code, which is federal laws, has more than 50 volumes. And listen to this. In 2008, a House committee asked the Congressional Research Service to calculate the number of criminal offenses in federal law. They responded 5 years later, "We lack the manpower and resources to answer such a question." They said, we spent 5 years trying to figure out how many laws are at the local, state, county level. We don't have enough people. 613 laws really isn't that many. And again, what did Jesus do with those 613 laws? He turned them into how many? Love God, love neighbor. Which is the first and second table of the Ten Commandments. The first four being the first four commandments, the second table being the second or the six commandments at the end. And guys, I really hope that in all of our families, we're trying to do this with the kids' catechism over there, teach the Ten Commandments more. The church historically has centralized the Ten Commandments for discipleship in the church in ways that we aren't in our day. For example, the Westminster Shorter Catechism, 42 of the 107 questions are about the Ten Commandments. And the New City Catechism, 11 of the 52 questions are about the Ten Commandments. And I don't say that we need to begin to study the Ten Commandments so that we can go and tell the government, you need to put these, post them back on the building, quit taking the Ten Commandments off. I'm saying that we need to ask them to implement these and to rule according to them as a standard of justice and righteousness. However, here's the caveat. That feels really hypocritical to me when in the church most of us don't even know the Ten Commandments ourselves. And yet we're going to go tell the government to begin to live by and apply these. I want to put one more passage before us and I'll be done. Romans 13, I was thinking about this last night. And in Romans 13, Paul's talking about the government. And so he says, this institution has been ordained by God. Pay your taxes, honor the emperor. And he's talking about government. And then right after that, he says this. Listen, the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And any other commandment are summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So he quotes the second table. And then he says, love does no wrong to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So if you go, Pastor, quit confusing us with all this law stuff. Shouldn't we just love the culture? Yes. That's actually what we do for the culture. We love them. But then you have to ask the question, how do we define love? What do we mean by love? Now we're back to the laws. Because the laws define what love looks like. So we love by keeping the law and helping others live according to this law. And the law reveals love. But we can't stop there. Our ultimate message to the culture is that God's love has been displayed in Christ, our lawkeeper, who died for sin. Romans 10:4 says, Christ is the end, or that is ultimate purpose of the law for everyone who believes. Romans 7:7, Paul said, if it had not been for the law, I wouldn't even have known what sin was. For I would not have known what it was to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. So it was the law that led to Christ's love being shed abroad in Paul's heart. And so, guys, there's no conflict as we engage culture between law, love, and Christ. those things work seamlessly together in the gospel. And it's a very hopeful message for our culture